Alright guys, so today's video is going to focus on animating straight ahead, adding a frame, modifying it, adding a frame, modifying it, adding a frame, modifying it over and over again without any major movements along the way. I do go back and add some in-between frames in the process to kind of ease things out, but I also go back and delete things in the process. So you may wonder what's happening on here on the screen without really any context. This is going to be a Nintendo 64 controller turning into Super Mario's face. There's also going to be a second where we take a Game Boy and we turn that into Pikachu's face. But I started here because I felt like this would be an easier process just because the Nintendo 64 controller's layout kind of already looks like a face in kind of an abstract way. But thinking about that and thinking about animation just in general, there is something called smear frames, which are these big, major, blurry looking frames that exist between two major positions in a movement. Adds a little bit of snappiness to an animation, makes it feel like it has more life to it, for lack of a better term. I'll show some of those on the screen now. They're used in cartoons, they're used in video games, they're used in all forms of animation media. So, to say that, I kind of want to take that and apply it to an animation, but also show the process to show how these animations actually were made. Because I know that oftentimes as a beginner, especially when I was a beginner, I thought the animation, every frame would look cohesive or it would make sense. But in reality, these things that exist between these major movements really don't make that much sense. So I'm going to apply that here. You guys will see the process play out. I'll come back a little bit later. Also, before this first animation is over with, I feel like I should say what it was inspired by. It was inspired by the start screen for Super Mario 64. You know, Super Mario 64 had the screen at the very beginning where you could warp, modify, stretch, distort Mario's face, which would make sense why I'm turning a Nintendo 64 controller into Mario's face. I guess I probably should have described that earlier, but, you know, whatever. But, yeah, anyway, let's go ahead and just wrap this one up and show you the final animation for it. Alright, so with that one, I was pretty happy with it, and I think I found my bearings with it and kind of just getting started and kind of understanding what I was doing. This is the one I was talking about earlier. We're going to take Pikachu, and we're going to turn him into a Game Boy, or a Game Boy into Pikachu, the other way around. The first thing that I realized whenever I was doing this animation is that it was going to be a lot more difficult than the Mario one was, just because the buttons weren't arranged in a way where I could take the features and turn them into facial features. So I had to kind of do some shifting around with some more smear frames of making things like they had fast movement and blowing things up, making them bigger, doing lots of snapping. I should mention too, I'm using another principle of animation here called squash and stretch. Squash and stretch really is just how an object's reacting to movement or how it's reacting to hitting a surface. An object can't lose mass, I guess, unless it breaks or it falls apart, and even still doesn't lose mass, it just kind of disintegrates into pieces. But you probably have seen like the bouncing ball animation before and how adding a squash and stretch bit to it can make a big difference in the overall personality of an object. Now, I'm not an animation expert, so I'll leave that up to the experts to describe in more detail. Hopefully that makes sense in kind of what I'm talking about here in the process. It just helps me make the transitions between a Game Boy and Pikachu a lot easier because I can snap into a movement and use squash and stretch in that process. Alright, and coming towards the end of this animation, whenever I had to take the Game Boy screen and turn it into ears, I think that was probably the hardest part of this animation, just because I'm going from a solid, totally filled in surface to two separate pieces that are kind of hanging out. It felt kind of difficult just because it was such a harsh transition between those two types of objects, but I feel like I made it work. I did use some squash and stretch to kind of make it happen, but I also did use some of those smear frames that I talked about earlier to try to make that transition a little bit smoother. I was pretty happy with how it turned out when it was all said and done with, and pretty proud of just the fact that I was able to take it from that harsh surface and turn it into those two separate entities. But you can see me moving things up and down here, just trying to make the animation have a little bit more punch here at the tail end. But let's just go ahead and talk about the final animations. Alright, so here we are. We've arrived at the tail end of this video. On the left, you can see our first experiment, making Mario out of a Nintendo 64 controller. Then on the right, we have Pikachu being made out of a Game Boy. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. A lot more of the animation process than just drawing things from scratch. But if you liked the video, make sure to like it. If you want more stuff like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to, tell me which one that you liked better. Do you like the Pikachu one better? Do you like the Mario one better? I think I like the Pikachu one better, but I think the Mario one was kind of a nice starting point. Anyway, thank you guys for sticking around this long. I appreciate it, and I'll catch you next time.